The forest was alive, but not with the usual sounds of animals. No, this night, the woods whispered with something else, something darker, something hungry. The trees swayed, their branches like grasping claws against the moonlit sky. Shadows danced, twisting familiar shapes into monstrous forms. The air grew cold, heavy with a silence that screamed danger. This was no place for a man to be alone. But Jake was alone. He was lost. Jake loved the outdoors. Ever since he was a child, the forest had been his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the hustle and bustle of everyday life. The towering trees, the chirping birds, and the rustling leaves always brought him a sense of peace and tranquility. He loved the feel of the sun on his face, warming his skin and lifting his spirits. The way the sunlight filtered through the canopy above, creating a mosaic of light and shadow on the forest floor, was nothing short of magical to him. The smell of pine needles, fresh and invigorating, filled his lungs with every breath. It was a scent that reminded him of countless adventures and the simple joys of being in nature. The crunch of leaves under his boots was a comforting sound, a reminder of the path he was forging through the wilderness. Each step was a connection to the earth, grounding him in the present moment. Today, he decided to explore a new trail. He'd heard about it from a fellow hiker who described it as both beautiful and challenging. A perfect combination for someone like Jake, who thrived on adventure. He'd heard it was a challenging hike, but he was confident in his abilities. With years of hiking experience under his belt, he felt ready to tackle whatever the trail had in store for him. He set off with a smile, eager to test himself against the wilderness. Hours passed as he navigated the twists and turns of the trail, each step bringing him deeper into the heart of the forest. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows across the path. The golden hour bathed the forest in a warm amber glow, making the surroundings even more enchanting. Jake realized he'd misjudged the trail. He was lost. He checked his phone, hoping for a signal to guide him back, but there was none. The realization hit him hard, and a sense of unease began to creep in. Panic welled up inside him. The once familiar and comforting forest now seemed like a maze, with every tree looking the same. His heart raced as he tried to remember the way back. He needed to get out of the woods before nightfall. The thought of being stranded in the dark, with no clear path to follow, was terrifying. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves, and began to retrace his steps, hoping to find his way back to safety. The first sign was the smell. A sickly sweet odor, like rotting fruit, wafted through the air. Then came the sound, a soft humming, barely audible, yet it sent chills down Jake's spine. He stopped, listening intently, his heart pounding in his chest. There, in the distance, he saw him. A tall, slender figure stood motionless beneath a gnarled oak tree. The figure was shrouded in darkness, its features obscured by the shadows. Jake called out, his voice trembling, "Hello? Can you help me?" The figure remained silent, but it slowly began to turn towards Jake. As the figure moved into a patch of moonlight, Jake's blood ran cold. The man, if you could call him that, was smiling. It was a wide, grotesque grin that stretched impossibly across his pale face, revealing rows of sharp, pointed teeth. His eyes were wide and unblinking, reflecting the moonlight like two icy orbs. The smile wasn't friendly, it wasn't welcoming, it was predatory. It spoke of madness and malice. It was a smile that haunted your nightmares, and it was the last thing Jake saw before he turned and ran. Adrenaline surged through Jake's veins. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. He could hear the heavy footsteps of the smiling man crashing through the underbrush behind him. Branches whipped at his face, drawing blood. He pushed himself harder, his lungs burning, his legs screaming for mercy. The forest seemed to close in around him, the trees twisting and contorting, their branches reaching out like grasping claws. The air grew thick with the scent of decay and the sound of his own ragged breathing. Fear, primal and consuming, propelled him forward. He didn't know how long he ran. Time lost all meaning. The forest seemed endless, a labyrinth of shadows and whispers that threatened to swallow him whole. His mind raced, replaying the image of the smiling man. The unnatural grin seared into his memory. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent shivers down his spine, reminding him of the horror that pursued him. He stumbled and fell, his hands scraping against the rough forest floor. The pain was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the terror that drove him. He could almost feel the smiling man's breath on his neck. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring the searing pain in his ankle. Each step was agony, but stopping was not an option. The smiling man was relentless, and he knew that if he paused for even a moment, it would be the end. He had to keep moving. The forest was a maze, but he pushed through, driven by sheer willpower and the primal instinct to survive. His breath came in ragged gasps, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. Finally, through the trees, he saw it, a faint, flickering light that pierced the darkness. It was a beacon of hope in the oppressive gloom, a light, salvation. It was distant, but it was there, a promise of safety and refuge from the nightmare that chased him. He surged forward, his last reserves of strength pushing him towards the promise of safety. Each step was a battle, but the light grew closer, brighter, a lifeline in the darkness. He burst through the tree line and into a clearing. The sudden openness was disorienting, but he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. A lone cabin stood bathed in the warm glow of a porch light. It was small, but it was a fortress compared to the forest. He had escaped. For now, he was safe. But the memory of the smiling man would haunt him forever. Jake didn't remember the drive home. The road was a blur, the foggy windows obscuring his view, making everything seem surreal. He couldn't recall how he got into his house, or how he managed to get into bed. It was as if he was moving through a dream, each step automatic, each action devoid of conscious thought. All he could remember was the smiling man, the chilling grin, the relentless pursuit. That face haunted him, a grotesque mask of malevolence that seemed to follow him even in his waking moments. He lay awake all night, every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside his window, sending shivers down his spine. The house, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison, each sound a reminder of the terror he had escaped. Sleep, when it finally came, was filled with nightmares, dark, twisted visions of the smiling man, his grin growing wider, his eyes piercing through the darkness, leaving Jake in a cold sweat. The next morning, the sun streamed through his window, painting the familiar room in a comforting light. The warmth of the sun seemed to chase away the shadows, offering a brief respite from the fear that had gripped him. He told himself it was just a bad dream. Standing in front of the mirror, he tried to convince himself that it was all in his head. A figment of his imagination. A figment of his imagination. He repeated the words like a mantra, hoping that saying them enough times would make them true. But deep down, he knew the truth. The fear in his eyes, the unease that gnawed at him, told a different story. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The woods held secrets, dark and terrible secrets, and he had stumbled upon one of them. The memory of the smiling man was a reminder that some things are better left undiscovered, that some paths should never be tread. As night fell again, Jake found himself drawn to the window, peering out into the darkness. He thought he saw a shadowy figure in the distance, and his heart raced. Quickly, he closed the curtains, trying to shut out the fear that threatened to consume him. He knew he couldn't live like this, in constant fear. He had to find a way to confront the darkness, to face the smiling man, and whatever other horrors lurked in the woods. Only then could he hope to reclaim his peace of mind. With a deep breath, Jake made a decision. He would return to the woods, armed with nothing but a flashlight and his resolve. It was time to uncover the truth, no matter how terrifying it might be. He never went back to the woods. He avoided hiking, camping, anything that might bring him back to that place, to that night. But the smiling man remained, a constant shadow lurking at the edge of his thoughts, a reminder of the night he had stared into the abyss, and the abyss had smiled back. He often wondered if he was the only one. Had anyone else encountered the smiling man? Or was he alone in his terrifying secret? He knew one thing for sure. He would never forget the night he met the smiling man. Have you ever had a strange or unsettling encounter in the woods? Share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more spine-chilling tales from the unknown.